And so you were talking about celebration and the importance of it. I think there would be opposition maybe to the belief in the idea that, well, there needs to be a sort of reverence, and do you think that there's place for reverence and celebration to coexist with one another when maybe someone has the picture of a bunch of kids like partying and saying, oh, we're celebrating God or whatever, to which some people who would definitely be more high church or orthodox would consider this the improper way to celebrate God because there's a lack of reverence and maybe even a disrespect towards who God is. What would you say? What would you comment on people that would say this?
I think that's really fascinating. I'm answering it in a really roundabout way, but I've been thinking recently about cross-centric Christianity or resurrection-centric Christianity. And, how much emphasis are you putting on Good Friday and how much emphasis are you putting on Resurrection Sunday? And I think the outflow of that is it's effectively how much emphasis am I going to put on my sin and the price that was paid for it versus new life and the abundance that is there for me. And you may, when that is negatively affected and lived out, you end up with, woe is me, I am of no worth, even though you're made in the image of God. You know what I mean? Like there's downplaying of what, like I'm but a worm kind of vibes. Or if it's the resurrection side, maybe you could be cheapening grace and not having enough severity when it comes to sin, or perhaps enough reverence when it comes to the Lord. And what I find incredible is in Nehemiah 10, I think, is this journey. And I think that's what is really beautiful about this whole thing is with the idea of celebration being story. I think that we are meant to relate to God and we are meant to even celebrate through a process and not necessarily in a like unimodal way. And so what you see is the priests read out the law that is found, and then the Levites are explaining it to the people, and the people are realizing their sin. They're smack bang in Good Friday, like they are struggling under the weight of conviction of the Holy Spirit. Like I have sinned, and this law is like showing me like a mirror. I am a sinner. I am not enough, and I think that's the right reaction. Like that's how we should react to the perfect holy God. However, that's when Ezra or Nehemiah, I think, stands up and he's like, don't cry. The joy of the Lord is your strength. And he points them, he like lifts their head and he points them towards, we can be joyful in God because of what he's done. And then what they do after that is they celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. And it says that there was such like rejoicing in the city that it was heard from miles away. And so I think that when we look at how we're meant to celebrate, are we meant to be super solemn and reverent perhaps, or lighthearted or whatever? I think that we can be in danger when we just typecast it and say, this is the way. I think that it's appropriate to have different expressions in different places, and it's good to have different expressions in different places. And I think that God places different aspects of himself in different peoples in different times. So it's always going to look different. But I think ultimately it's a process. And in our celebration, there should be space to reflect the reverent, awestruck, maybe solemn, sad element of the fact that we are a sinner and Christ had to die for us, into resurrection, into joy, and ultimate rejoicing. And that's the process that we see in the pattern of the feasts themselves, as it finishes with the most rejoicing in the liturgical year for the Jews. So I'd say that story and that process is necessary and good, but it is important to ultimately recognize that it finishes with great rejoicing and with no tears. So, and that's the end of our story, like the story of the world and the universe. It ends with no tears. He wipes away every tear and we are rejoicing. So I think that we need to allow space for many different expressions. We need to appreciate many different expressions. I really hate the idea of shutting down people that want to be solemn and reverent, because I think that's really powerful. I don't think that's dead. I think that's really powerful and important. However, I think we the process naturally moves towards jubilant, extravagant celebration that is filled with joy. I've come to a set definition, a special moment of coming together to stop, remember, and appreciate. That's when I started realizing how relevant it is and how actually central, I would even say primary, it is to be intentional in celebration and in the midst